There will be a full overhaul of the Orioles hitting program, or at least the coaching staff this offseason, as Cody Asche also not returning as Orioles hitting coach. So what do the O's do now in those open positions? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, November 6th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at maybe another view of the Orioles coaching staff, because we got more word earlier this week that two more coaches will be departing this staff. That is hitting coach Cody Asche and first base coach Anthony Sanders. So we'll talk about how the O's will replace them and what this kind of hitting group will look like for the O's in 2026. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Just download the FanDuel app today. So for the Orioles, more coaching changes are coming. We saw the introductory press conference for new manager Craig Albernaz back on Tuesday with Mike Elias and David Rubenstein there as well. And something that Elias talked about was, they were still trying to fill out what Albernaz's major league coaching staff will look like. And he wanted to work in tandem with Albernaz to put together that staff. Now, up to this point, we knew that assistant hitting coaches Sherman Johnson and Tommy Joseph would not be returning, Johnson taking a job with the White Sox and Joseph being let go. And then we also knew that Robinson Chirinos, the bench coach, has been basically given the okay to look for other jobs and won't be back. And the expectation of the reporting was that Anthony Sanders, first base coach, would also not be back with the O's, alongside Tony Mansolino exiting the organization as well after not getting the full-time managerial job. So we got some more reporting earlier this week on Tuesday. Cody Stavenhagen, who covers the Tigers, and then Britt Giroli over at The Athletic had the story, which was corroborated by the Orioles beat reporters as well. Sanders and Asche will both be leaving the Orioles to join the Detroit Tigers. Sanders will leave the Orioles to take the same role, first base coach for Detroit, and Cody Asche leaving the Orioles as the hitting coach to be the assistant hitting coach for the Tigers in 2026. Now, for Anthony Sanders, it was reported last week that the Orioles had given Sanders permission to interview for other jobs. He was originally hired by the Orioles in 2020 and has been their first base coach ever since. Not really a surprising move, since he's one of the more veteran coaches, very much a part of the Brandon Hyde era and the Brandon Hyde staff. Sanders also worked with the Orioles outfielders. He had previously worked with the Rockies for a while before being hired by the O's. In terms of Sanders' performance, right, he seemed to be a solidly liked guy in that clubhouse and was very interactive with the fans as well over at first base. One thing I will say about Anthony Sanders is, he does work with the outfielders defensively. You think about the, I'd say, up and down nature of the Orioles defensively in the outfield. Like Colton Cowser has made himself a Gold Glove winner. Or not a Gold Glove winner, should be Gold Glove winner, but a Gold Glove level defender. Anthony Santander, I think, maximized how good he could be as a defensive outfielder. That is all credit to Anthony Sanders. We know how good Mullins was, but Mullins also really regressed as his time went on, and the Orioles couldn't find a way under Anthony Sanders to make, Ryan Mountcastle or Jorge Mateo or Heston Kjerstad even look like serviceable outfielders out there. We'll kind of see what it continues to look like for someone like Dylan Beavers, but it's been an up and down in terms of guys getting better or learning those outfield positions. Not a surprise, though, that Sanders is gone, leaving an opening for the Orioles at first base coach. Now, a name that we had talked about for first base coach is Antoine Richardson, who had been the first base coach for the Giants and then for the Mets. He had worked with Albernaz in San Francisco. He was looking for different jobs. He really helped the Mets extremely improve their base running this year. And with the connection to Albernaz, I thought that would be a great choice for first base coach or even bench coach. Well, the Braves hired Antoine Richardson as their first base coach on Wednesday, so he is unfortunately out of the mix, and the Orioles will have to look elsewhere. But I think the bigger news of coaching departures is Cody Asche, who the Orioles originally hired as a minor league hitting coach back in 2022. They promoted him to the big league staff in 2023 as an offensive strategy coach. He was in that role for 2 years. Remember, he was a part of the team that put together a top 5 offense for the Orioles for basically 2 years straight. Then when Matt Borg-Schulte and Ryan Fuller, the co-hitting coaches, left the organization after the 2024 season, Asche, who was their assistant, was promoted to lead hitting coach last offseason, and they brought in Sherman Johnson and Tommy Joseph to be the assistants under him. Asche was really well liked by the players, really well liked by the front office. He's also kind of the longest tenured hitting coach with this current crop of players because he came up through the minor leagues and was with them for 4 years. And obviously, Cody Asche was not fired, right? He took another job, but he took a demotion. He went from Orioles hitting coach to Tigers assistant hitting coach, which probably means the Orioles, just like they did with Sanders and Chirinos, were allowing Asche to interview with other teams and seeing that the writing was on the wall and were potentially only going to offer him a demoted role, right? Like I talked about this a little bit. I wouldn't have been surprised if at most, the Orioles brought in maybe a co-hitting coach to work with Asche or asked if he would go back to the minors and be like the minor league hitting coordinator for the Orioles. That was something I definitely could have seen coming and felt like they needed another change of voice at the major league level. Obviously, Asche wanted to work at the major league level, so he leaves and takes another job. I really do think they were fine letting someone like Tommy Joseph go. I really don't think the Orioles wanted to just overall fire Cody Asche. I think they value him too much in this organization, but we're looking to make a change among the top hitting coach job, and you can understand when those two worlds collide, someone's going to look for another job. And that is what happened here. And the other thing was, with the news of Johnson and Joseph being out over a week ago and Asche still hanging around, it made it more and more seem like the Orioles weren't just going to fire Cody Asche. And if it was going to end with him in Baltimore, it was going to end something more like this of him taking another job. Now, again, the Orioles offense was not good this year. It's had its struggles down the stretch last year. There were some changes made. They came in and the Orioles finished 24th in runs scored. They were 20th in team WRC plus. They had the 3rd highest strikeout rate in Major League Baseball. They had a fairly low walk rate on the season. Their team on base percentage was 24th in the majors. Now they still did things well in terms of looking under the hood. They were still 8th in hard hit rate in the majors. They were still 9th in barrel rate in the majors. They were still 9th in average exit velocity. They were doing the things you need to do that lead to hits generally, but just something was not clicking. And that made you think there was probably going to be a change. And again, there were a lot of injuries on the offensive side for the Orioles as well. And that's a legitimate part of this that you do have to bring up every time, how many important hitters missed time with injury this season. But there was still bad performance when those guys were healthy. And that is the concerning part. And this is something I've talked about. John Mioli writes a lot about this at the Baltimore Banner. It's like, the Orioles are going to bring in reinforcements via trade or free agency. They're going to make this team better this offseason. But what is going to make this team bounce back in whole hinges on the performance of their young core of hitters. The Adleys, Gunners, Jordan Westberg, Jackson Holliday, Colton Cowser people are going to make more of a difference than even if they do bring in one big-time hitter. That's going to make things better, but they still need those other guys to produce or it's really not going to matter. And so the O's are trying to find what voice is going to come in there and turn things around. And the other part here is it does worry me a little bit that back-to-back years, we've seen a huge overhaul of the hitting coaches, right? You have Borg-Schulte and Fuller out last year. You have Asche and all 3 of them out this year. That lack of continuity can become somewhat of an issue in the clubhouse. Now, if all those guys weren't doing a great job of relaying the message, maybe you need them out anyway. But if you're turning over a new hitting coach every year, that is not a sustainable way to put together a good offense. That is something that concerns me. And here's the other thing. If the Orioles hitters generally struggle again in 2026 under whoever does become the hitting coach and the assistants on this staff, I think if there's more struggles this upcoming year, I don't think you can blame the hitting coaches again. Like, what is the common denominator there? The same group of core hitters in all those, essentially 2.5 seasons where they would struggle. You have to look a little more inward there. So it's definitely a turning point coming up for this Orioles team. The other thing is that no matter what the O's do here, right? They need a bench coach, they need a first base coach, they need a hitting coach. They're going to hire at least one assistant hitting coach and potentially two of them as well. They've had that be kind of a three-person team for a while now, which again is very, very standard across all of Major League Baseball. One of the things that annoys me the most, people being like, why do we have more than one hitting coach? Look at literally every single team. I digress. This is something that whoever they bring in is not going to be someone who's going to change what the Orioles want to do offensively. What the Orioles are looking to do is what every good team is looking to do. It's what the Dodgers and the Blue Jays are looking to do after making the World Series. Hit hard line drives, hit the ball in the air, get pitches you can do damage on, and do damage on them. That is a general philosophy for hitting in Major League Baseball. All right. The Orioles aren't going to bring somebody in who's going to lay down a sac bunt every single time someone gets on first base. A, because that's stupid and bad strategy. And B, because that's not what Mike Elias is going to do. He's still going to have a huge say, along with Craig Albernaz, who made it very clear how he feels on Tuesday on who this hitting coach is going to be. And the Orioles have too much talent, right? Yes, the Guardians did play a lot of small ball when Albernaz was there. That's because they didn't have a very talented lineup outside of Jose Ramirez. Sometimes they felt like they had to do that to squeeze out all the talent and somehow win back-to-back AL Central titles. The Orioles have a lot more offensive talent in that lineup than the Guardians do. They don't need to be playing that way to have success. It's not going to be about the approach. That stuff is only going to be tweaked more so than overhauled. It's going to be more about the message. Who can get this message through better to these players for when they do get into a slump? Because every player, even Gunnar Henderson, is going to slump. The Orioles have seemed to have issues over the past year and a half climbing out of those slumps. Every player slumps. The greatest players in the world slump. The best ones are the ones who are able to pull themselves out of those slumps and get back on track. And the O's have really struggled to do that. So I don't know if it's a message. I don't know if it's a mental skills coach thing, whatever it may be. That's something they really need to address. And that's one of the skills I would like to see from whoever comes in to take over this Orioles hitting program. And, with potentially 2 or 3 openings with one hitting coach and 2 assistants, I think it's certainly plausible and probably likely that someone gets promoted from the minor league side for the Orioles into one of those assistant jobs, right? It pretty much happens every year. Ryan Fuller came up through the system. Cody Asche up through the system. Sherman Johnson joining last year up through the system. At least one of the 2 or 3 is probably going to be from there. But there's also going to be at least one outside hire. And I would think the main hitting coach is probably going to be an outside hire. So I wanted to take an exhaustive look at who this outside hire could be, because not just in baseball, especially in baseball, but as I found as I get older in life, in the just business world in general, it's pretty much more about who you know rather than how good you are at what you want to do. At the very least, those 2 things are equal. A lot of this stuff is about building relationships and who you know and who you want to bring in. Makes sense in the baseball world, right? I've worked with this person. I've seen them do their job well. I trust that they can do it again. I want to bring them in. I have a previous relationship with this person. So generally, as the O's have made coaching hires like this, everybody they hire has some sort of connection to Elias or someone in the front office or someone already on the coaching staff. So to me, that says, okay, Connor, identify people who Mike Elias knows and people who Craig Albernaz knows. And in there, you'll probably find the next hitting coach. So up next, let's start with the people who have connections to someone like Craig Albernaz, some people he knows, he's worked with, who he could look for Mike Elias to bring in as the Orioles' next hitting coach. We'll talk about some of those names coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So as we talked about, a lot of this coach hiring is about relationships. And as Elias and Albernaz talked about on Tuesday, they're going to kind of combine to put their heads together to bring in the best coaches to fill out this major league staff over the next couple of weeks. Let's start with who has a relationship with Craig Albernaz, who could be either the next Orioles hitting coach or at the very least one of the assistants to join this team. Let's start with Donnie Ecker, 39-year-old who is currently unemployed but has been a big league hitting coach before. He was the hitting coach for the Giants for 2 years in 2020 and 2021, working with Albernaz, who was there at the time as the bullpen coach. Previously, Ecker was also a Reds assistant hitting coach in 2019. He left the Giants to be the Rangers bench coach and what they called offensive coordinator in 2022. He was in that role for 3 years. They removed the bench coach title this year, so he was just offensive coordinator / hitting coach, but they fired him in May after a disappointing beginning to the season. He has not gotten a new job since. How about Justin Veal? 34-year-old, currently is the Rangers hitting coach. Veal actually originally a draft pick by the Orioles, 37th round back in 2013, the Dan Duquette regime. Played in the system for 2 years. Then the Orioles immediately hired him as the hitting coach in Frederick in 2015 when his playing career was done. Then he went and coached in college. Then he coached in the Dodgers system for a while and then was hired by the Giants to be the co-hitting coach alongside Donnie Ecker on the same staff as Craig Albernaz in 2020 and stayed in that role through 2024. So worked with Albernaz for 4 years when he then reunited with Ecker as the Rangers hitting coach. Now, when they fired Ecker, they retained Justin Veal, and he is still in that role, at least for now. How about Dustin Lind, 36-year-old, currently the assistant hitting coach for the Phillies. He was a Giants hitting assistant coach in 2020 and was there for all 4 years Albernaz was in San Francisco through 2023. Just like Albernaz, Dustin Lind left when Gabe Kapler was fired at the end of the 2023 season, was hired by the Phillies as an assistant in 2024, and is still in that role. How about some people from Guardians land? How about Dan Puente, who is currently the Guardians assistant hitting coach, 43 years old, also an original Orioles draft pick, drafted by the O's in 2004, played 2 years in rookie ball. Then he worked at a private hitting facility for a while, then was hired by the Cubs as a minor league coach in 2020, made it all the way up to Guardians assistant hitting coach in 2024, and worked with Albernaz for the last 2 years. How about Chris Valaika, 40-year-old, who is currently the Cincinnati Reds hitting coach. He was a player and then became a hitting coach in the Cubs system. Guardians then hired him as their hitting coach in 2022. He held that role for 3 years, but was let go after 2024, hired by the Reds, and is also the brother of Orioles legend Pat Valaika. And I'll also keep your eye on Josh Tubbs. He's been a big hitting data analyst guy for the Guardians for the past 2 years, working with Albernaz. Would not be surprised if the Orioles try and poach him for some sort of strategist or assistant role. Couple more guys in kind of more of the Rays realm. Remember, Albernaz was a player and then a coach for the Rays in the minor leagues for a long time before he got hired by the Giants. How about Dan Dement? He's 47 years old, currently the AAA hitting coach for the Atlanta Braves. Dement was a minor league player for a while, then was hired by the Rays as a coach in 2019. He moved up their system and he crossed paths with Albernaz as both a coach and a player in the system. And then he was the assistant hitting coach for the Rays at the big league level for 2 years, 2022 to 23. Rays then let him go, and he's been the AAA hitting coach for the Braves for the last 2 seasons. And the other one would be current Rays assistant hitting coach Brady North, 34 years old, was coaching in the Rays organization with Albernaz in 2019. Then he was in the minor league system for a while and then was promoted to Rays assistant hitting coach and has been in that role for 4 years now. The Rays did, though, just announce that North will not be back in his assistant hitting coach role in 2026. They have reportedly offered him a minor league hitting coach job to stay in the organization, but are allowing him to look for other jobs at the big league level. So North is someone who is very available, and maybe the Orioles would go get. And again, all of those guys, some sort of relationship to Craig Albernaz. In terms of what they bring, probably the best known one of the group is Donnie Ecker, who was with the Reds and the Giants and then the Rangers until this year, has the most time as an actual big league hitting coach, or the most experience you might be looking for. And is still, much on the younger side, is still only 39 years old. So a good mix there. It didn't go well in Texas this year. I mean, you got to admit that their offense was pretty bad, but Ecker was also the hitting coach for the Rangers when they won the World Series in 2023, when they came in and dominated the Orioles in that ALDS. That offense looked unstoppable for that entire postseason run. That was Donnie Ecker who was leading the charge. So yes, it didn't end well in Texas, but there were some really high highs for him as their hitting coach. And also, not only was he there in Texas, he was also the hitting coach in 2021 for the Giants when they went out of nowhere and won 107 games to win the NL West. He helped a lot of those Giants hitters reach their maximum potential. Ecker has done a lot of good work. If I had to pick anyone from this Albernaz group, I would target Donnie Ecker potentially as the next Orioles hitting coach. But Craig Albernaz is not the only one who's going to have the say here, and is not the only one with the connections. Mike Elias has been in baseball for almost as long as Albernaz has, and he's got connections too with people he worked with in Houston and before that as well. So there's certainly some Elias connections who could fit here. We'll talk about those guys for these potential hitting coach roles to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season. Whether you're following the NFL, the NBA, or both, there's no better time to jump in on the action. And if you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere that Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. And I've been using Prize Picks during both a football Sunday and an NBA tip-off. It really keeps every game exciting. And plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves your lineup from a loss. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. That's at Prize Picks. It's good to be right. So we talked about the potential hitting coaches that are connected to Craig Albernaz. How about the potential guys for the jobs who are connected to Mike Elias? Let's start with Alex Cintron, 47-year-old, currently unemployed, but who was hired by the Astros in 2017 as a coach when Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and Eve Rosenbaum were still over in Houston. He became the first base coach in 2018, then was moved to be the Astros hitting coach in 2019, and was in that role for 7 seasons, overseeing maybe the best offense in the American League for a lot of that stretch, until the Astros let him go this offseason. Cintron has been kind of connected to some other hitting coach jobs that are open, but I can almost guarantee you Elias is at least going to make a call to Alex Cintron. How about John Malley, 56 years old, currently the assistant hitting coach for the Chicago Cubs. He was hired by the Astros as a hitting coach in the big leagues in 2013. Remember, Mike Elias got to Houston in 2012, so they crossed over. He was in that job for 2 years. Then the Cubs hired him. He went to the Cubs, then to the Phillies, then to the Angels, then back to the Cubs, all working on big league hitting staffs. So he does have a lot of experience and a connection to the front office. How about Alonzo Powell, a little bit older, 60 years old, currently the AAA hitting coach for the Angels. He'd been a minor league hitting coach for a long, long time before the Astros hired him as an assistant hitting coach at the big league level for 2016 and 2017. Then he went over to the San Francisco Giants, where he was their hitting coach for 2 years, 2018 to 19, before they hired Donnie Ecker, coached in Japan for a bit, and then came back to the Angels at the minor league level in 2024. How about Rafael Pena, 32 years old, is the Phillies' other assistant hitting coach. We already talked about Dustin Lin. Rafael Pena is the other one. He was a development coach in the Astros system in 2018. That was Mike Elias' final year in Houston. He worked his way up to Astros minor league hitting coordinator by 2023, and then was hired away by the Phillies the next year, and that is where he has been since. How about Dylan Lawson, 40-year-old, currently assistant hitting coach for the Boston Red Sox. He was a hitting coach in the Astros system from 2016 to 2018 while Elias was there. Eventually then was hired by the Yankees to be a hitting coach in their system and made it all the way up to being the Yankees big league hitting coach in 2022. But he didn't last long there. In June of 2023, he was fired from that job. There were some communication issues between him, the players, and the front office. But that offseason, he was hired by the Red Sox as an assistant and has been in that role ever since. And then how about Ben Rosenthal, 46 years old, currently unemployed, but was a hitting coach in the Astros system from 2017 to 2021, so 2 years of overlap with Elias. Then the Red Sox hired him as assistant hitting coach in 2022. He has been in that role for the past 4 seasons, but the Red Sox announced a couple of weeks ago that they would be letting Rosenthal go from that role, so he is currently a free agent. And the last one is someone who's near and dear to my heart. That is Kevin Martir. He's 31 years old. He is the hitting coach for the Brewers AA team right now, so a little less experienced, but University of Maryland catcher, drafted by the Astros when Mike Elias was in charge of the draft in 2015, played in that system for a while, then started coaching in the Philly system in 2019. Yankees hired him the next year where he was a hitting coach in the Yankee system for 5 seasons before the Brewers hired him this year to be their AA hitting coach. He is an ascendant coach in the minor leagues. He is someone that I have some connections to through Maryland baseball. He's a little more outside the realm. Maybe the O's would hire him as a minor league coach before they brought him to the majors, but someone with the connections who, I just had to get Kevin Martir's name into this podcast as a possibility. Now, I mentioned for Albernaz, the most likely would be Donnie Ecker. I think from this side of things, I'd probably go for a tie between Dylan Lawson and Alex Cintron as the most likely. Cintron, been the hitting coach for the Astros forever. Lawson, who was the Yankees hitting coach for a while, Red Sox for a while, knows the division. A lot of front offices like to work with him. Just there was a disconnect at one point with the Yankees, and he kind of became the scapegoat for them. But I have to say, it would be very surprising to me if someone gets hired in this role who does not have some sort of connection to either Craig Albernaz or Mike Elias. It's just not how Elias and the Orioles operate. It's just not how most teams in Major League Baseball operate. Again, it is so much about relationships and who you've worked with in the past and who you know. That's kind of where I see this hire coming from. Even if they haven't worked with them, it's probably going to be someone Albernaz or Elias know from the past they've crossed paths with at some point in the baseball world. But again, I did a similar exercise to this when the Orioles were hiring a pitching coach a couple of years ago, and I didn't do enough research to identify Drew French's connection to Mike Elias. And of course, Drew French ended up being that hire who got the job. And it seems like French and the rest of that pitching coaching staff are going to remain on under Albernaz. I think that's a good move if the Orioles do decide to do that and keep French and his team there. They've done a great job here in Baltimore over the past couple of years. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got one more episode coming your way tomorrow, and I think we'll have a little bit more Orioles news and notes, maybe some more coaching news to talk about. We'll certainly talk about George Soriano, right-handed reliever who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Marlins on Wednesday. We'll get you his story, how he could help the Orioles bullpen. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I am Connor Newcomb. Happy free agency because it's officially open today. And this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.